Okay, thank you. I'm delighted to be here and to present on behalf of myself and my colleague Frederica Pina from the University of St Andrews. The university is famous for a few things. St Andrews perhaps is what we call a beautiful place on the east coast of Scotland, being very old. We're also quite a small university, but very research-intensive university, very international focused. We have something like 47% of our student body is international. So to start with, I just really want to talk about, to introduce the background, and I'm going to talk today about how we've developed some workflows between both open access and research data management sides of research support teams. So we have quite a strong history of our research information system and repository infrastructure. Initially, we had an in-house system connected up to a DSpace repository. We now have a pure research information system. The initial drivers were very much about research management, research assessment, enabling these things. Gradually, though, the drivers have increased towards using them to enable openness in all sorts of ways. Alongside this, over the last year, there's been a development in the Digital Research Division, which is based in the University Library, which has a strong strategy to develop joined-up support for our researchers, to enable open research in the widest sense. Our open access team, which I head up in the university, has a long-standing collaborative approach. We work closely with lots of other universities. Over the last 2 years, we've been part of the JISC-funded Open Access Good Practice project, the LOG project, in conjunction with University of Edinburgh and Heriot. And we've worked with a number of other universities looking at their sort of processes for implementing these strategies and learning from that. We've developed internally what we call some mini Pathfinder projects, working with individual schools. And a couple of years ago, we went through a lean review process, which I won't go into here, but it was very useful in just informing the way we constantly rethink our approach and the way we work with academics. So the research data management infrastructure has been developed again over the last year, primarily in response to drivers from external funders such as EPSRC, which has really made us think that we have to implement strong infrastructure and support. And over that time, we've tried to bring together what we do in open access and the research data management team. So again, just to sort of fill in the background, many of you will be familiar, but in the UK we have quite a number of strong drivers from funders who are requiring certain practices with research data. So when we go out to talk about academics, we're focusing on things like making sure they have at least thought about a data management plan, whether they've actually submitted one, but certainly thinking about the structures of it, so they're considering how they will comply with any requirements and share their data. We're talking really about the data supporting publications and that will be published, rather than the active management of data here. And it's important that we always emphasise the need to acknowledge funders in publications, and then to think about where the data will be made available. The basic requirement is making it publicly available wherever possible, and storing it and retaining it for a certain amount of time, depending on certain criteria. And they should consider cost as well when they're applying for grants. On the open access side of things, we've had probably an even longer history of funders requiring consideration of open access to outputs. The biggest game changer that everyone in the UK will be aware of is the new policy for the next research assessment exercise, the REP, which means everybody is having to consider how they will make their publications open access. Again, we focus on making sure funders are acknowledged, explaining that these requirements apply to certain types of publications, And then we get on to the actual practicalities, and the rest of this is going to be talking really about practical workflows and things that have to come into play with all this background. When and where and how do we deposit? Can we charge costs? And how do we go about this? So, sorts of questions that we get asked as we go out. We're now actually invited to go out and speak to people rather than having to knock on doors. Largely on both sides, the why questions still go on, still really valid, but tend to take place in other discussions. People really want to know how, when, how do I actually go about making my work available. And that's on both sides. And sometimes for researchers who are not familiar with working through this process. So with all these questions in mind, and in discussions mainly with heads of school, directors of research, we were asked to come up with something that would visualise something easy for researchers to remember. All this was going on, all this complexity, how could we actually show them what it meant to them? So we came up with a workflow that was basically mapped onto the publication cycle, something they're all familiar with, they're going through repeatedly. So it's really getting that embedded into something that they already do, and they can just slot in and hopefully remember as they go through this process and through the cycle. So we mapped out research data workflow and the open access workflow, just tried to show where things linked up. So just going to sort of break that down slightly. Firstly, for the research data management, and we're talking to people about doing this early, creating a data set record in our research information system, which is in Pure. We talk about doing it early because very often it's important for them to get a DOI that they can include in a manuscript when it's submitted. So getting this record done means that we can create an inactive DOI. The research, the RDM team get a notification when a new record is created, so without any prompting they can just create this DOI and have it ready. We don't explicitly offer any mediated service. We are expecting researchers to engage with the system directly and do this deposit, because the system there is meant to be part of how they disseminate their research and other types of content. So the next stage would be at acceptance. At that point, we don't actually get a notification through the system. That's something we would like it to do. But at the moment, we have to ask researchers to make a change to the record or notify by email. And at that point, we can activate the DOI to make sure that there is at least a landing page, so that if we put a DOI in their publication, there will be the metadata available. And then explain to them that later on, once the publication is available, the record can be validated and files can be made visible. The system now integrates directly with DataCite, which has been really helpful for us. Previously, we had to do it manually, and it could take quite some time to register a DOI. Now it's just a few seconds, which is ideal. So on the open access side of things, our key message that we emphasise, and I'm sure this message is in most universities now around the UK, is to act on acceptance. Making sure that that's the point, something clicks, something happens, and they create a record in Pure. Around the deposit process, we have lots of guides and documents and individual training sessions, but this essentially shows them something must happen at that point. We then show these other boxes really to tell them that metadata at that point is made visible. There will be additional publication details added, and the full text released later on in some sort of line along with publication, depending on embargoes. Because one of the biggest questions is, but surely I can't do this early. So we just, up front show them that this is going to happen in a flow later on. So taking, again, that part of the workflow, we're just looking a bit more at what goes on behind the scenes, what we have to develop around this. We for open access have different deposit mechanisms. Ideally, again, the researcher doing it, we do have some mediation going on. Ideally, this is locally mediated, which I'll talk about a little more in a second. Really, we find the people who are closest to the publication are the best place to find and make the various links to other content, particularly the grants that are underlying it. They'll know that much more readily than somebody in the library. There's usually lots of dialogue going on here and other questions, but this can not always be the case, so we try and simplify it for those working straight through the process. So the library can then carry on, do some validation, copyright checks and so on, set embargo dates once we get the relevant information, and finally validate and make files available, again letting them see that this happens in a later process and the full text becomes available at some point later on. So there, ideally, we would like there to be more automation, more availability of metadata records. So things like the cross-ref proposals to create DOIs at acceptance would help us greatly, make life even easier for researchers. So we're always looking at new ways that we can get content into the system. The links that I mentioned that people can make can happen either way. So from a publication record, we can pick relevant bits of content, or from the data record, we can select the content. Ideally, these forms would match. Bits of the system have been developed at different times, so as yet they don't quite match, but we can feed that back to the suppliers and hopefully make it even more straightforward when researchers are using these templates. So I mentioned other ways of bringing content in, and of course we've got some subject areas where they use subject repositories, physics particularly, using the archive database. And their big question is, why do I have to do this again? So luckily the system can import records that are already in archive. They can go to that source through the API, do a search and bring things in. The system will look and see if there are duplicates. It will try and match either by title or recognize that something's already been imported from that system. Match the authors, looking to see from our internal records which authors are matched. The only hiccup comes when you've got publications where there are maybe hundreds, if not thousands of authors, and then the system likes to fall over. For the most part, it does its matching reasonably well. And researchers can set that up as an automated scan, so they can put in name variants, which enables them to just, every 7 days, run through archive. So if a co-author has added more papers, they can bring things in through that route. Some of the other flexibility that we've introduced, I mentioned the mediated deposit. So in one of our schools, which we worked with, what we called our mini Pathfinder School of Chemistry, they have such a volume of publication that they decided it was worth their while having local staff who would help to make the deposits. So in fact, authors just need to email direct to the school office with their accepted manuscript. That kicks off the process. That means there's then just 1 or 2 people that we can work directly with, train up in some of the deposit processes, make sure they're aware about making these links. And then we can also add into the process things like contacting our research data management colleagues at the appropriate time. So the result of this in chemistry, going from traditional relatively low deposits through the system, even though they've had funder mandates around for quite a while. It's obviously a very big increase, reaching at the moment something like 91% of their outputs having the manuscript deposited. And there's also, similarly, the data is being measured by the colleagues. So in terms of really advocacy and rolling out this workflow, we're very much trying to do a joint approach going out delivering tutorials when we can, allows researchers to address all their questions surrounding a particular piece of work they're in the middle of to the team on at the same forum. Allows them to get a real picture of the whole process, how it overlaps. We find drop-in sessions to be really useful when we can find good locations to take the service out and actually meet with researchers. Very often in a large presentation we won't ask questions, but if we're sitting around having coffee, they can come up and ask that awkward question about, do you have some money for open access? Internally across our teams, the open access and RDM teams, make sure we constantly communicate. We've now started experimenting with sort of inserting gentle reminders. If one team is communicating with a researcher, adding in some information just to remind them about the other part of the process. It means that we're also building up our own skills, consulting with colleagues as we go through the process. And just very recently we've again increased the digital research division in the library by bringing in the posts that actually are the Chris administrators. So we're now working even more closely physically as well as the way we've always worked together with them. So really just to look at the benefits, the pros and cons of this approach. As I said, we can address both sets of questions in one situation, give them an overview. It can feel efficient, so researchers can just organise an hour session where they can get almost everybody there and try and discuss the whole process and get it into their minds and share that with them. As I said, we've been raising the knowledge and experience more that teams work together, so in the open access team now becoming aware a bit more of when a file might be added, what might have been supplementary information and actually is a data set that needed to be in a separate record. And having this visualisation really makes us look at it, and because we're having to explain it, think, well, is this the right way? Constantly go back to it, perhaps change process. And of course we can share all the organisation of making these events happen. On the downsides, we do find there can still be a lot of confusion. So if we're discussing researcher requirements or the FP policy for the next rev, people can get themselves mixed up as what's required for certain publication types and what's required for their data. And it can be resource intensive because we're trying to have a member of both teams go out at each event, and it could be that everyone is actually focused on one area. So we need to balance out our resources that way. So this is kind of where we're at the moment. 171 dataset records currently in the system, most of which are actually stored in our local storage in the system, some pointing to datasets held externally. With the articles, these are the deposit rates, which we've kind of measured in snapshots. So when we first started looking at where we were at, which was around 40% or so, when we first started basically rolling out a policy that said everyone should be depositing at acceptance. We saw that steep rise with the schools that we worked with closely, particularly chemistry, that very quickly built up the awareness and the process. And then some of the other schools, particularly arts and humanities, where it's been much more slow and steady, and they've kind of waited until the hefty policy is very much upon them. But they're now all coming together at around about 80%, which is really down to a lot of effort and a lot of communication. So just really to start summarising, the deposit rates in both areas is definitely increasing. We do feel, and we have a lot of feedback through our academic liaison team and others, that researchers really appreciate us bringing the service to them and trying to tailor it and understand their needs. So looking at what they do already and trying to refresh it appropriately. Where we've managed to do the decentralisation of mediation, we've found that that frees us up to actually do the downstream work that the library has the skills to do. And gradually people out in schools are building up that knowledge. They can become the local sort of hub of support for their colleagues who come along and ask, just remind me what the process is again. And it's brought us very much together. So, I mean, physically we're right beside each other where we work. We have lots of meetings to arrange these sessions and so on. So it's become, to us, what feels more cohesive rather than completely separate parts of a system. We're still not at 100%. We do have some directors of research that just keep coming back with, why are we not doing everything yet? So we've still got work to do. And there's still people who don't, there are people who don't come to sessions or maybe on field work, aren't in the university. So getting the message to everybody is still a challenge. We do actually need to be invited out to schools. So, I mean, we have tried inviting researchers to come to us, but it's really not effective. So we need to build up really strong relationships. We have a member of our team now that actually worked previously in the school office in chemistry, and she now knows, she can be our sort of secret messenger that goes out. She knows how the school offices work and can inform us of the ways that we can communicate with people. But it's still a challenge, and there's still a lot of schools that just say, no, it's fine, we know what we're doing, and we're all okay, thanks. So it's still a challenge to go out and try and communicate that message. Just visually to see how it works, this is the portal, the system, that's sort of the front end of our Pure Chris, which has all of the content that's made visible. It's presented through this portal. Separate to that, we have our repository, which is a DSpace repository. So all the content that's made fully open access is pushed into the DSpace repository. Slightly blurry picture there, but of the list of publications. So, as I said, at the moment we're looking at 80% deposit rate, but obviously a lot of that content is still under embargo. Looking at last year, we now have 57% of our articles that are flagged as open access. So we're growing the amount of content that could be available through these channels. It's very easy, I think, for people to discover different types of content. So from publication, looking at the data and the projects that underlie these publications. Interestingly, a lot of people now are seeing the data actually as the primary output from their project. So people may well travel to the record of the data first, and then only as a secondary thing look at the article as a narrative, if you like, of that data. So it's interesting, we're starting to get these conversations about how to structure people's data and present it. So with all these links that can be made, people can end up on the hamster wheel of research activity. This is somebody who obviously has a long career and lots of connections. But we can, of course, filter down and focus on things and look specifically at various bits of content. And just to conclude, I think researchers have asked us and seem to need a very simple message about the processes and workflows that they can reference against what they already do. We need to be flexible, and we have found that trying to distribute some of the tasks, the right tasks, at a local level can help us when we have a low level of resource, and it means that we can extend our knowledge on the things that we're doing downstream. So thank you.